you know how like right-wingers love to argue that white people are losing representation in life? Well, it looks like white people might be far more overrepresented in death. So according to a new study, thousands of Americans are given the wrong race on their death certificates each year. Now, the issue varies between racial groups, but Hispanic, Asian, Native Americans are the worst affected. By and large, the error stems from funeral directors' offices who are responsible for filing death certificates. And they tend to be misclassifying them and calling people who are not white, white. So the misclassification rate is 3% for Hispanic people, 3% for Asian people, and a worrying 30% for Native American and Alaska Native populations. By those figures, an estimated 4.8 million Americans living today could be given the wrong race when they die, according to the 2020 census data, which is insane. You wonder, how does that happen? What would that even look like? Well, apparently, let's jump down to graphic 7. Funeral directors rely on informants, which is a very, very weird way to classify how you identify someone's race, to fill in the details of the deceased on forms that are then sent to the state's vital records office. This is the former president of the National Funerals Director Association. The informant is usually a family member or close friend, but they don't always know how the deceased wants to be remembered, Hightower said. Informants aren't always used though, and sometimes funeral directors aren't able to find one. And the problem, especially with Native Americans, are that multiracial and Native American people of Native American heritage can be overlooked. And especially, get this, if they have what would be considered a white name. So we're just guessing. I mean, it's kind of the way Republicans like choose who they want to purge from a voter roll. Like that sounds Latino, X out, you know what I mean? Same thing in death. And this has been sadly, a big year for death. A couple of years, 800,000 people died of COVID in the last couple of years. One family member was particularly affected, and just sort of giving an insight into what that is like to have their loved one given a different race upon death. This is, I believe this is their father, who is mislabeled as white, saying, quote, "You took part of my father's identity and took it away from him. As an African-American male, we're oftentimes portrayed in a very negative light. Given that this man worked all his life, was a US Air Force veteran, a father and a good husband, I think his story should be told correctly. It's a kick in the teeth." And this is Marvin Dooley III. So yeah, this is like, I mean, and it kind of gives you this sense of just how kind of the lack of care and the funeral industrial complex, as it were, and how expensive it is, how ridiculous it is. And then on top of that, 4.8 million people being labeled a different race in death.
Yeah,
what's going on?
It's just wildly demoralizing. When you're having such a personal experience as like the death of a family member, and you go to a mortuary or whoever it is that's supposed to like help you through that, and you realize that it's just a giant machine that is the opposite of personal. And that can bear out in all kinds of ways. Like, someone goes to you and says like, "Oh, we were really happy with Mitch's services," and you're like, "It's Mick. If it was Michael, it's Mick." You're just like, "That's not the name." "Oh, we're so sorry." And now you realize that we do the same voice for everyone. It's just terrible. So there's a long tail of this. Also, like all kinds of demographic data is warped and useless when something like this happens. Politicians can easily sweep cause of death issues under the rug and move on. And it's that plus the personal problems with it. So
yeah, and apparently it costs money, and it's a whole bureaucracy to actually change someone's race in death. But like I just think our entire census, the entire like how we also count like what is a white person, what isn't a white person, and the fact that like mixed race people are automatically people of color rather than white people, like it's all, I don't know. I just feel like it's all very ridiculous. And but yes, really like kind of disrespectful, just insanely disrespectful to do this to a family in their time of grief. And I didn't know that. I didn't know this happened regularly, and apparently it does. So fun. All right, you guys.
Check out the Damage Report podcast each day, wherever you get your podcasts, whether Pocket Casts or Stitcher or iTunes. You can join me as I give you the news and stories you want, with a range of co-hosts and interview guests jumping in on the fun each day. Again, that's the Damage Report, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you get them at iTunes, don't forget to rate and review. Sometimes I'll read them live on the show.